Raina Evans hadn't been nervous when she got the job. In fact, she was relieved. After months of temp work and a stretch of unemployment that had drained her savings down to fumes, landing a full-time position at a manufacturing plant just outside Sacramento felt like a lifeline. The benefits were decent. The pay was better than minimum wage. And the HR woman who interviewed her, a bored-looking middle-aged lady with too much blush, had promised, "We're like a family here." But as Raina parked her rusted Corolla in the lot that morning and looked at the sea of men in dirty coveralls moving toward the building, something inside her shifted. It wasn't fear, not exactly, just a whisper, a tightening in the chest. Still, she shook it off. She'd worked harder jobs than this. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to work, get her paycheck, and go home to her tiny apartment and her overdue bills. She could handle hard. She had for most of her life. Inside, the plant was loud, metal clanking against metal, forklifts beeping in reverse, someone shouting for more clamps near assembly line 4. The air was heavy with the smell of grease and old sweat, the kind that clung to your clothes no matter how much you washed them. A shift supervisor met her near the time clock. White, stocky, late 40s, with a thick mustache and a name tag that read Clint. He didn't offer a handshake. "You the new girl?" Raina nodded. "Raina Evans." He looked her up and down. "Put your stuff in locker 23. Hope you brought thick skin." She raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" He just smirked. "You'll see." That was the first red flag. But it wasn't until she walked past the break room and heard it, clear, loud, and soaked in sarcasm, that she realized what she had stepped into. "Look alive, folks," someone called out. "The slave ship just docked." Laughter followed. She froze. It wasn't even noon. No one looked at her. No one apologized. They just moved on like it was normal. Like it was funny. Raina kept walking. She didn't say anything. Not because she was afraid. Because she was trying to understand what kind of place thought a comment like that was okay. By the end of the day, she had her answer. The jokes kept coming, casual and cruel. Someone called her auntie, in a way that didn't sound endearing. Another guy asked if she braided hair on the side. One walked past and muttered plantation chic under his breath. It wasn't just the words. It was the silence from everyone else. The white woman at Machine Station 8, who turned her head and pretended not to hear. The Latino man who chuckled awkwardly, but said nothing. The line lead who rolled his eyes but walked away. No one stopped it. No one even acknowledged it. At lunch, Raina sat alone at the corner table. She pulled out her sandwich, but couldn't eat. The pit in her stomach wasn't hunger. It was recognition. She'd felt it before. In college. In temp jobs. At the DMV. The look. The tone. The invisible line between us and you. But this was new. This was institutional. It was baked into the walls. And she hadn't even made it through her first week. When her shift ended, she didn't clock out right away. She sat in the car for 10 minutes, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. She could quit, walk away now, and save herself the stress. But something in her clenched. It wasn't anger yet, not rage, just a promise forming in the back of her mind. You will not break me. You will not push me out. Not quietly. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app. She typed, Day 1, comment, slave ship just docked. Supervisor present. No action taken. She saved it, then drove home. And just like that, Raina's story began, not as a victim, but as a witness. And eventually, as a storm they never saw coming. It had been a week. 7 days of clocking in before dawn and clocking out after dark. 7 days of silent stares, whispered slurs, and laughter that followed her like a shadow in the hallways. Raina had said nothing, not yet. But her Notes app was growing longer by the day. Every night, she sat on the edge of her twin mattress and typed each comment, each look, each little moment that chipped away at her dignity. She told no one, not even her mother, especially not her mother. You got a job? Her mom had asked on the phone that weekend, her voice relieved. Baby, God is good. Raina didn't want to taint that hope. Not yet. Not until she knew what she was really up against. It was Monday again. The plant floor felt louder than usual. The machines hissed like snakes. The fluorescent lights above her workstation flickered in a slow, almost mocking rhythm. But it wasn't the noise that made her chest tighten. It was the wall. Near the break room, tucked just behind the lockers, there was a stretch of concrete wall where workers posted notes, inside jokes, and random scribbles. Raina had passed it every day. Never stopped. Until that morning. Because something new had appeared overnight. A drawing. Childish and crude, but unmistakable. A stick figure. Hanging from a tree. Underneath it, someone had scrawled, "Keep that girl in line." She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She just stared. Because sometimes hate doesn't come with shouts, it comes in ink. She stood there longer than she meant to, her lunchbox hanging from her wrist, her breath shallow. Then she took out her phone and snapped a photo. Another note saved. Another thread added to the noose they were tying for themselves. "Yo, you good?" A voice came from behind her. It was Deshaun, a forklift driver from Line 6. He was one of the only other black employees she'd seen on the floor. She turned slowly. "You seen this?" He didn't even look. "I don't need to." "You know who did it." Deshaun hesitated, glancing down the hallway. "Don't matter. They won't do nothing. They never do. You just ignore it." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "I got 2 kids. I ignore it till I retire. That's how I survive." Raina nodded, but something in her tightened again. Survival. That word again. The anthem of people forced to pick silence over justice. Not her. Not anymore. That afternoon, she went to HR. For the second time. She knocked on the door labeled personnel. The woman from her interview, still caked in blush, looked up from her screen. "Raina, right?" she asked flatly. "I need to report something." Again. The woman sighed. "Was it physical contact?" "No." "Then it'll go in your file," she said, reaching for a yellow folder. "But unless it escalates, we usually recommend mediation." Mediation. With the offending party. If you know who it was. Raina blinked. "You want me to sit in a room with someone who drew a lynching joke on the wall?" The woman paused. "Let me see if I can file it under harassment then. But no promises. No promises." She walked out of that room more certain than ever. They weren't just ignoring the problem. They were part of it. That night, Raina uploaded every photo, every screenshot, every journal entry into a locked folder in her Google Drive. She gave the folder a name she wouldn't forget. If I Disappear. And then, for the first time, she called someone. Not her mom. Not a friend. A legal hotline for workplace discrimination. She didn't say much. Just asked questions. Listened. Took notes. When the woman on the line said, "You may have grounds for a civil case," Raina didn't flinch. She'd already made up her mind. They wanted her to be silent. But silence had never saved anyone. Not on a factory floor. Not on a plantation. And not in 2025. The first real retaliation didn't come with shouting. It came with a schedule. Raina showed up Tuesday morning at her usual time, 6:30 a.m., only to find her name scratched off the roster and moved to Station 9, a section of the floor nobody wanted. Hot, cramped, and dangerously loud. Station 9 was where misfit machines went to die. The belts were glitchy. The parts came late. And the supervisor? A wiry man named Kevin who had a reputation for letting problems pile up until they exploded, then blaming whoever was closest. Raina didn't protest. She just clocked in, threw on her gloves, and got to work. But it didn't take long to notice something strange. No one was talking to her anymore. Not even to insult her. The jokes had stopped. The comments. The passive-aggressive smirks. It was worse than before. It was invisible. That afternoon, Kevin handed her a maintenance checklist twice as long as usual and said, "You're on cleanup today too. Everyone else is backed up." She glanced around. Everyone else was standing idle. "Did something change with my role?" she asked calmly. He shrugged. "You filed that HR thing. Just covering our bases." That was all he said. No threat. No profanity. Just a smug little jab to let her know they were watching. And punishing. Quietly. Raina didn't argue. She took the list, walked back to her station, and pulled her phone out while the machine rebooted. Day 9, reassigned without explanation. Extra duties. Other workers idle. Supervisor quote, "You filed that HR thing." She uploaded it to her "If I Disappear" folder and moved on. But that was just the beginning. By the end of the week, her lunch breaks had been cut short. Her badge mysteriously stopped working at the east entrance, forcing her to walk a quarter-mile around the back. She received her first ever below expectations evaluation, signed by a manager she hadn't even met. She called the hotline again. This time, the voice on the other end was firmer. "You're experiencing retaliation. That's not just unethical. It's illegal." Raina felt something shift inside her. She had always been the quiet one, the one who made things work, who adjusted, who smiled through the tension and kept her head down. But every time they tried to shrink her, she got louder, in the ways they couldn't hear. By mid-February, she'd documented 47 separate incidents. Graffiti, verbal abuse, ignored complaints, suspicious schedule changes, bad evaluations, witnesses who saw and said nothing. But she needed more. She needed proof. So she bought a pen. Not just any pen, a discreet recording pen with a tiny camera, barely the size of a shirt button. The next time Kevin told her to lift a 90-pound crate alone, while 3 others leaned on the wall and watched, she was ready. When he muttered, "Should have just kept your mouth shut," as she passed, it was recorded. When Clint, the original supervisor, joked to another manager that the factory's turning into a sensitivity camp, she got that too. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just recorded. And when one of her co-workers, Maria, a Latina woman from line 3, slipped her a folded sticky note that read, "They're trying to make you quit. Don't," she knew it wasn't just her imagination. Later that night, Raina sat at her desk with the pen camera in one hand and the note in the other. The silence in her apartment was deafening. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed. Radios played. People laughed. But inside that small room, she was preparing for war. Because the moment they started retaliating, they didn't just cross a line. They drew a target on their own backs. And Raina, she was finally ready to aim. The thing about retaliation was, after a while, it stopped looking like retaliation. It started looking like normal. That's how they wanted it to feel. By the end of the 3rd week, Raina had been reassigned to 3 different stations, given 6 extra safety briefings no one else had to attend, and been written up twice for equipment delays caused by machine errors she didn't control. And every time she tried to question it, the answer was the same. It's standard procedure. Standard for who? For her? Or for anyone who dared to speak up? The worst part wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't the physical exhaustion from doing twice the labor with half the support. It was the silence. The eye contact that used to glance her way when someone made a joke, gone. The people who'd once nodded at her in passing, heads now turned. Even Deshawn, the forklift driver who once warned her to keep her head down, avoided her completely now. He wouldn't even meet her eyes on the floor. It was like she had become radioactive, untouchable. And the more she was ignored, the more she understood why so many others stayed quiet. Isolation isn't loud. It's suffocating. Still, Raina refused to be invisible. She kept recording. Every conversation. Every comment. Every time she was told she was too slow or not team material. She cataloged it all. Names, timestamps, shifts, supervisors. And one day, when she opened her locker after a brutal 12-hour shift and found a sticky note that read, "We don't need your kind of drama here," she didn't cry. She took a photo and emailed it to a law firm. That was the turning point. Up until then, she had only been collecting. Now she was engaging. The lawyer who called her back 2 days later wasn't warm or fuzzy. Her name was Eliza Hart, and her voice was sharp, no nonsense. She asked Raina one question. "Do you want to settle this quietly, or are you willing to go all the way?" Raina hesitated, not because she was unsure, but because she knew what that meant. Exposure, public filings, news stories, risk. But then she remembered the first day. The words, "Welcome to the slave house," and how everyone laughed. She took a breath and said, "I'm not settling for silence." Eliza didn't sugarcoat anything. Once this goes to HR officially as a legal complaint, they'll circle the wagons. You'll be treated like an enemy. You'll be watched. You might get suspended. You ready for that? I've been watched, Raina replied. I'm still standing. Eliza asked for documents, recordings, photos, statements, everything. Raina sent it all that night. 2 days later, the factory received her formal legal complaint. Retaliation, racial harassment, hostile work environment. That same day, Raina arrived to find her locker emptied. All her things were in a cardboard box sitting on a folding table by the security gate. A note was taped on top. You've been reassigned to the third shift pending review. She knew what that meant. They wanted to bury her in the overnight grind, where there were fewer people to witness, fewer co-workers to whisper support, fewer chances for her to record anything useful. But they underestimated one thing. Raina didn't need daylight to see clearly. She took the box without a word, clocked into third shift, and kept her pen recorder close. Because the darker it got, the more the truth would stand out. The third shift was exactly what they hoped it would be. Lonely, isolating, disorienting. The factory floor at 1 a.m. wasn't just quieter, it was colder. Like the walls had soaked up the heat of the day and let it bleed out slowly, leaving only a shell behind. Even the machines groaned differently at night, like they didn't want to be awake either. Fewer workers meant fewer eyes, fewer witnesses, fewer people to hear the things whispered just loud enough to sting, but not loud enough to prove. Like the whisper that met Raina her second night on the new shift. Snitches don't last long here. She didn't see who said it. She didn't need to. She clicked her pen recorder, placed it gently in her chest pocket, and kept working. By the end of her first week on third shift, she documented. A supervisor assigning her double cleaning duties while others rested. A coworker accidentally bumping her tray off a cart, then laughing. A bathroom stall with a message scratched in the paint. Rats get exterminated. And yet, HR said nothing. Management said less. But her lawyer? Eliza was watching everything. She called every 3 days now, sometimes late at night, just to check in. They think isolation will break you, she told Raina. But isolation only works on people who aren't building evidence. The lawsuit was officially in motion, filed under federal labor law, racial discrimination, hostile work environment, retaliation. It named 3 supervisors and the company itself. And now everything changed. The company responded by lawyering up, fast. Their attorneys fired back with denials, shifting timelines, and legalese meant to confuse. They said Raina had performance issues. They said she misinterpreted workplace banter. They said she had a history of emotional sensitivity. And then they did what companies always do when the facts weren't on their side. They tried to rewrite the narrative. One morning, just after her shift ended, Raina was called into a meeting room with HR, a clipboard in one hand and a forced smile on her face. Just a quick review, they said. Inside was a performance report with 6 separate incidents Raina had never seen before. Late to station. Failed to follow instructions. Unprofessional tone. All lies. All signed by supervisors who'd barely spoken to her in weeks. It was clear. They were building a paper trail to fire her, to bury her case under excuses and forge timelines. But Raina didn't flinch. She pulled out a manila folder from her own bag, filled with time-stamped footage, screenshots, emails, voice recordings, and handwritten notes from her shifts. She placed it on the table between them. Their smiles faded. We'll need time to review this, HR mumbled. Raina stood up. Take all the time you need. Outside the door, something unexpected happened. A voice called softly from behind a row of lockers. Raina. She turned. It was Maria, the woman from line 3, who had once slipped her a note. Her eyes were nervous, her voice low. I saw what they wrote in your file. It's lies. If you need someone to back you up, I'm here. Raina blinked. You sure? Maria nodded. My cousin went through the same thing at another plant. She stayed quiet, and they ruined her. I'm not going to let them do that to you. That moment didn't just restore Raina's strength, it multiplied it. Because in a place built to keep people silent, One voice speaking up was dangerous. But two, that was the beginning of change. Later that night, Raina emailed Eliza. I have a witness now. I'm not alone anymore. Let's go all the way. And for the first time since this all began, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was winning. The factory had gotten used to silence. That's why it panicked when the story started making noise. It began with a blog post. Not a headline. Not a breaking news alert. Just a quiet, well-written piece by a local labor justice group titled, When Work Feels Like a Plantation. It didn't mention the company by name. It didn't even mention Raina. But it described the same factory, same location, same job structure, same pattern of abuse. And it used one quote, anonymously sourced, that stopped Raina cold. They greeted me like I was property, not a person. Like they hired a body, not a voice. Raina hadn't said those words publicly, but someone had. Maria, Deshawn, or maybe one of the others, the quiet ones still clocking in and staying quiet, watching from the shadows, praying someone else would speak for them. Either way, it was out now. It wasn't viral, but it was growing. And with it, so was the pressure. 3 days after the blog post went live, Raina was pulled into another HR meeting. This one had a lawyer present. Not hers. The company's. A tall man in a gray suit who introduced himself with a smile too wide to trust. We just want to clarify a few things, he said, flipping through her file. We want to understand your intentions. My intentions? Raina asked. Yes, he said. Are you trying to resolve this internally, or are you, let's say, coordinating with outside media? Raina leaned forward. My intention, she said, is for the truth to come out, however it has to. He stopped smiling. They ended the meeting quickly after that. Later that evening, her phone buzzed. It was Eliza, her lawyer. You need to know something, she said. They've hired a crisis PR firm. That means they're scared. Really scared. Why now? Raina asked. Because that article hit a nerve, Eliza replied. And if we time it right, we can drive the knife deeper. Eliza didn't mean violence. She meant exposure, strategy, reckoning. And that's when they made a choice, together. They would not wait for a courtroom. They would let the world in. The next day, Raina recorded a short video in her living room. She didn't use the company's name. She didn't point fingers. She just spoke. Clear, calm, tired but certain. I walked into work every day being greeted like a slave. And nobody stopped it. Not HR. Not supervisors. Not the people who watched and looked away. I've collected evidence. I've filed complaints. I've followed every protocol they said would protect me. Now I'm telling my story. Because someone else is walking into that building tomorrow, and they deserve better. She uploaded it anonymously to the same labor justice blog that started it all. Within 48 hours, the video hit 30,000 views. Within 72 hours, it had doubled. And by the end of the week, a local journalist emailed Eliza asking for an interview. That's when the factory's tone changed. Suddenly, they wanted mediation. Suddenly, they were open to dialogue. Suddenly, they offered a cash settlement quietly. A large one. 6 figures. But it came with a condition. An NDA. No interviews. No articles. No more speaking. Eliza laid it out plain on the call. They want to buy your silence. Raina paused. Not because she didn't know the answer. Because she wanted the weight of it to settle before she spoke. Then she said, not unless I write the last word. And just like that, they were back in the fight. But this time, the factory wasn't just battling one woman. It was battling the truth. And the truth doesn't sign NDAs. Depositions weren't like courtroom dramas. No raised voices. No pounding fists. No dramatic outbursts. Just a quiet room, a table, a recorder, and pressure. That's where the real unraveling began. The company had hoped Raina would fold before this step, that she'd take the money, sign the NDA, and disappear like so many others. But she hadn't. She had shown up. And now, their employees had to do the same, under oath. Eliza had warned her. They'll coach their people. They'll be tight. But it only takes one person to crack. Raina didn't expect it to be Clint. Remember Clint? The mustached supervisor from day one. The one who had called her the new girl, without so much as a glance. The one who smiled when someone yelled slave ship in her direction. He was smug in his first 10 minutes on the record. Said Raina had always been difficult. Said her complaints lacked context. Said she was misinterpreting good-natured humor. But then Eliza slid a transcript across the table. A line-by-line breakdown of a recorded conversation from 2 months earlier. Raina's pen camera had picked it up. Clint, laughing in the break room. Well, if she doesn't like it, she can always swim back to Wakanda or wherever. Silence in the room. Eliza waited. Clint cleared his throat. I don't recall saying that, he muttered. It's your voice, Eliza said calmly. Time-stamped. Clear as day. He shifted in his chair. Reached for the water bottle. Didn't drink it. Do you consider that appropriate workplace humor? She pressed. No. Do you consider that evidence of racial bias? Clint stared down at the table. I guess it doesn't look great. No, Clint. It didn't. When the deposition ended, Clint left the room without a word. But the damage was done because his denial cracked. And from that crack, truth began to leak. One by one, more depositions followed. Some workers stuck to the company script, denying, deflecting, saying they didn't remember. But a few, just a few, broke ranks. Maria gave her statement next, and she didn't hold back. She named names, dates, incidents she had witnessed, but had been too scared to report at the time. She described how Raina had been given the worst shifts, forced to lift loads alone, and how she'd seen messages scratched into lockers and stalls. One's HR claimed had been cleaned up before photos could be taken. Her voice didn't shake. She said, I kept my head down for too long, but not anymore. Another crack. Then came Jamie, a young white woman from the assembly floor, who quietly told the lawyers, I heard someone call her factory property one day. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but I did. I want to say I'm sorry. Eliza looked at Raina later that night and said, You're changing the culture. One deposition at a time. But it wasn't about culture for Raina anymore. It was about accountability. Because after months of suffering, months of collecting evidence, months of isolation, now, finally, they were the ones under scrutiny. And the fear she once carried into the building every day now belonged to them. To the supervisors whispering to their attorneys. To the HR director who had once told her, We'll look into it. To the company reps scrambling to find spin. Because the truth wasn't just leaking now. It was pouring. And once it starts pouring, there's no umbrella big enough to cover the shame. By now, the company was bleeding. Not just money, but control. Raina's lawsuit was no longer a quiet HR file tucked in a drawer. It was public. 2 local news stations had picked up the story. One ran a segment titled, Modern Factory, Old School Hate. Racism allegations rock local employer. Raina never asked to be the face of anything. She still wore her hoodie low when she went grocery shopping, still walked fast through parking lots, still silenced unknown calls just in case they were threats. But every time her inbox pinged with a new message that read, I thought I was the only one. She knew this wasn't just her battle anymore. So when Eliza called and said the company was finally requesting a formal settlement meeting, Raina didn't hesitate. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Neutral location. Neutral lawyers. Just numbers, silence, and paperwork. But on Friday night, something happened that made everything feel off. It started with a knock. Not the hard, aggressive kind that demands attention. No, this knock was soft. Too soft. It came just after 10 p.m., when the world was quiet and cautious. Raina paused her show, stood slowly, and peeked through the peephole. A man stood there, mid-40s, press coat, clipboard in hand. She didn't recognize him, but something about his stance felt official. Cautiously, she cracked the door. Ms. Evans, he asked politely. I'm here to deliver a courtesy message from a representative group tied to the mediation. That's how he said it. Tied to the mediation. Like he was UPS for legal intimidation. I didn't request a visit, Raina replied flatly. No, ma'am, he smiled. but we thought you might like to consider a few things before Tuesday's meeting." He handed her a manila envelope. Inside, a printed draft of the settlement agreement, a non-disclosure clause with blank dollar amounts, and a handwritten sticky note that chilled her blood. "Be careful. Some stories are safer left untold." That wasn't negotiation. That was a warning. Raina shut the door without another word. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve wasn't. She took a photo of the note, scanned the document, emailed everything to Eliza with a subject line. "They sent someone." Within minutes, Eliza called. Her voice was tight, controlled. That wasn't sanctioned. That's intimidation. Raina exhaled. "What do we do?" "We document. And if they're stupid enough to try again, we go to the press. With names." That weekend, Raina stayed quiet. Not scared. Strategic. Because now she knew something the company hadn't counted on. She wasn't the one who should be nervous. They were. They had tried to bury a problem. But instead, they'd unearthed a pattern. And they didn't know how deep it went. By Monday, Eliza confirmed the source of the unsanctioned visit. It was a third-party PR fixer, hired to mitigate reputational risk before the mediation. In other words, a legal thug with good grammar. They were unraveling. Tuesday came fast. Raina entered the mediation building with her head high. Her hoodie was off. Her hair was tied back. Her notes were in a leather folder she carried like a shield. She didn't come to beg. She came to decide. Inside the room, the company's lawyers spoke first. They offered a mid-six-figure settlement. More than before. But still with strings. Still with silence. Still with the assumption that her story could be purchased. Eliza looked at Raina. Didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because Raina already knew the answer. She flipped open her folder, slid over the evidence of the late-night visit, and said calmly, "Before we discuss numbers, let's discuss this." The silence in the room was louder than any siren. And in that moment, Raina wasn't the one on trial. They were. The silence after Raina dropped the manila envelope onto the mediation table wasn't ordinary. It was loaded, heavy, sharp. It didn't just sit in the room, it claimed it. Inside the folder were the photos she took of the late-night visit, the unsigned settlement document, the sticky note with the veiled threat, and a written statement of what happened. Eliza pushed it gently toward the middle of the table, like it was a chess piece. "Before we talk settlements," she said coolly, "we'd like to know who sent this man to her home." The company's head attorney, a thick-necked man with a practiced neutral tone, cleared his throat. "This was not authorized," he said. "We were unaware of any contact outside scheduled communications." "Your client hired the PR firm," Eliza replied. "We hired a consulting firm to handle crisis response. We don't micromanage their approach." Raina leaned in then, her voice steady. "Your approach almost felt like a threat." The man didn't reply, but his silence said everything. Because now they knew, Raina wasn't bluffing. She wasn't scared. She was documenting. And every attempt to silence her was making her case stronger. The rest of the session moved slowly. The company made another offer. This time higher. Much higher. High enough that most people would have walked away, signed the NDA, taken the check, and disappeared. But Raina didn't even flinch. She asked only one question. "Can I speak on record before this is finalized?" The mediator looked surprised. "That's not standard." "I'm not standard," Raina said. He nodded. She stood. Didn't read from notes. Didn't raise her voice. She just told the truth. This isn't about a bad joke in a break room. This isn't about graffiti on a wall. It's about a system that was designed to protect everyone, except me. It's about the people who laughed when I was harassed. The ones who looked away. The ones who smiled when they moved me to third shift, hoping I'd quit. It's about the silence I was expected to maintain, while they used my labor and disrespected my humanity. She paused, scanning the room. No one met her eyes. "I'm not taking this settlement because I need money. I'm taking it because I earned it. Because I built a case brick by brick while everyone else hoped I'd collapse. And because the next person who looks like me and walks into your factory, they deserve better." She sat back down. The company's lead attorney leaned toward his client and whispered something. They scribbled notes. The NDA clause was scratched. Raina's conditions were added. She could speak. Publicly. On her terms. One time. No restrictions. The company agreed. Not because they wanted to. Because they had no leverage left. By the end of the day, the settlement was signed. No apology. But no gag order. No silence. And sometimes, that's the real win. As Raina walked out of the building, the sky looked different. Wide. Open. Unapologetic. Just like her. Later that week, the company issued a public statement on their website. It was sterile, corporate, and gutless. We have reached a resolution regarding recent allegations. We remain committed to a respectful workplace. But no one cared. Because Raina had already told her story. The local paper published an op-ed the next morning with a single headline. She didn't just survive the factory. She changed it. And when a young girl DM'd her that afternoon and wrote, "I just got a job in a warehouse. If it ever happens to me, I'll remember you didn't stay quiet." Raina smiled for the first time in months. Not because it was over, but because it was starting. 6 months later, the factory still stood. The machines still roared. The gates still clanked open every morning at 6 a.m. Trucks still pulled in, loaded with supplies and raw ambition. From the outside, it looked the same. But inside, it had changed. Not because the walls repainted themselves. Not because the air magically grew kinder. But because one woman, refused to let silence win. Her name? Still wasn't on any plaque. Still wasn't on any wall. But everyone inside those gates knew it. Raina. They whispered it differently now. With respect. With unease. With quiet acknowledgement that she did what others only dared to imagine. She wasn't just the woman who sued. She was the woman who endured. The woman who kept showing up, even when they pushed her into corners and dared her to break. The woman who made notes when they hoped she'd forget. The woman who told the truth, even when her voice was the only one in the room. Her story wasn't dramatic in the Hollywood sense. There was no dramatic outburst. No courtroom scream. No last-minute confession. Just the quiet storm of a woman who refused to fold. And it changed everything. After the settlement, the company quietly rolled out mandatory anti-discrimination training. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. A few managers retired early. New HR policies were introduced. And for the first time in years, a town hall was held where employees were asked, not ordered, to speak. Maria still worked there. She got promoted. Deshaun put in a transfer request and left for another plant. But before he did, he left Raina a note. "You made it easier for the rest of us to breathe." As for Raina, she never went back. She didn't need to. She had already taken everything she needed from that place. Her dignity, her power, her proof. She moved to a new city. Started consulting for a nonprofit that protects workplace whistleblowers. She didn't advertise it. She didn't post about it on social media. She just did the work. The same way she always had. And sometimes, when she passed factories or warehouses or office parks with long fences and high turnover, she paused. Because she knew, behind those walls were more women like her. Quiet, tired, waiting for someone else to make the first move. But the truth was, they didn't need a hero. They needed a mirror. To see themselves clearly. To see what strength looks like when it doesn't shout. To understand that the system only wins when we decide our voices are too small to matter. Raina had proved otherwise. And now her story is here. Not to entertain, but to remind that the workplace isn't just where we earn. It's where we're measured, and too often mistreated. But when someone pushes back, even quietly, they shake the whole foundation. So the next time someone tells you to let it go, or just survive, or be grateful you have a job, remember Raina. Remember the box of lies they packed for her, the warnings they whispered, the settlement they offered to keep her quiet, and the words she spoke instead. "I'll take the money, but I'm keeping my voice." Now it's your turn. Have you ever worked in a place where silence was safer than truth? Have you ever swallowed injustice because the system said, "That's just how it is"? Tell us in the comments, because the more we talk about this, the harder it becomes to ignore. Like, share, subscribe. You're watching Life Stories by Ria. where the truth doesn't get silenced. It gets heard.